Good afternoon. First of all, I would like to thank the Syntrofer project for inviting me or inviting UITP to share our experience in this area. As Michael kindly introduced the presentation, I will focus on the economic case for public transport. Perhaps I should start by saying a few words about UITP. So UITP is the International Association of Public Transport. As Michael said, we represent public transport operators, but in fact represent the wider public transport community. So also the public transport regulators, the supply industry, and the actors of shared mobility. And before I start my presentation and looking at connectivity and economic development, I thought it would be useful to tell you some words, if I tell you some words about the figures of urban mobility. But I think it's very useful to have some sense of the orders of magnitude of what we are talking about. So as you can see, today, or more precisely in 2005, there were about 7.5 billion trips made in cities or in metropolitan areas worldwide every day. And if you look at the share of those trips, we see that there were about 3 times more trips made by private vehicles than by public transport. About 15–16% by public transport and 45–47% by private vehicle. If you look at the evolutions, the study we have shown, we have made, shows that between 2005 and 2025, the number of trips made in cities worldwide will increase by 50%. 50% due to demographic trends, economic development trends, of course. In Europe, because the demography is a bit lower, the economic development is also lower, the increase of mobility will be still high, but less high than the global average. And the number of trips in European cities by 2025 will increase by 25%. And I really wanted to show these figures because when we talk about mobility and connectivity, this is what it is about. This is these volumes that we have to keep in mind. And I think there is a very wide acknowledgement that a part of the solution facing this challenge of increased mobility, part of the solution is to have more balanced mobility patterns. And I think everybody agrees with that. However, in practice, we don't see a lot of this happening, or it's not happening fast enough. And I think that one of the elements that can help achieve this is to have to make a better economic case for public transport, to complement the good environmental and climate change case we have for public transport by a stronger economic case. And we have not been very good at that so far. And that's the reason why I think this conference is extremely timely, and the process that I think you would like to develop, looking at the economic case for better connectivity, is very good. So I would like to present some results. It's by no means an exhaustive review of the economic case for public transport, but some elements showing the economic impact of public transport and better connectivity. So first, I would like to look at the effect of investing in public transport. A number of studies have been done in a number of countries, and they've tried to distinguish and to measure the impact of investing in public transport. There is no standardization whatsoever between those studies, so they use different concepts, different approaches, but still we could probably distinguish similarities. And these studies distinguish usually direct impact of investing in public transport, which is the effect or the impact linked to the operation of the network. Indirect impact linked to the supply chain and developments in the supply chain. Induced effect that are linked to the re-injection in the economy of the direct and the indirect impacts. And then they also look at a range of wider, long-term, sometimes called catalyst effects of investing in public transport. And these are linked to agglomeration, to connectivity, and so on. As I said, there is no standardization of these studies, but when we look at the result, they usually show that the value creation of investing in public transport exceeds the initial investment by a factor between 3 and 4, usually. So that shows the very strong multiplier effect of investing in public transport, and it's clear that the catalyst effect, so the wider effect, the effect linked to the connectivity, play a quite important role in this multiplier effect. I plan to say something about the wider economic benefits using the London example, but I won't say much about this because it was covered by Stephen just before me. In a context in Europe and in North America where growth and jobs are at really the center of the political agenda, I think it's worth giving a look at this study that was just published a few weeks ago by the American Public Transport Association on what they call high-growth clusters. So high-growth clusters is what we would call in French pôles de compétitivité, so poles of competitivity. And they've tried to identify what they call high job growth industries. And they've looked at the localization patterns of these industries and the clustering patterns of these high growth industry. And they tend to join together because of agglomeration benefits. And so the study identified a lot of and quickly growing constraints in terms of access to these areas. The study quantified the potential of job creation linked to these high growth cluster, and they've tried to show quantify how public transport would unleash this potential of job creation by solving the accessibility problem. So, and I think this is something which, it was done in the US for a number of case studies there, but this is something that is very interesting to look at and to replicate in other areas. And certainly the approach is very valid for European poles of competitivity and European cases. Another example, another case that also comes from the US, and I must say that in fact in North America, Canada, and the US, they are quite good at making the economic case for public transport. And even if in terms of public transport, they are probably lagging behind from Europe, in terms of making the economic case, I think we have quite a lot to learn from the way they are making this case. And here, very interesting graph linked to the property value. And this graph shows that the value of properties that were located close to public transport, this value has much better resisted than the value of other properties not linked to public transport throughout the last 6-7 years, and in particular throughout the real estate crisis. And you see that for the example shown here, the value of property has decreased on average, but the value of property situated close to public transport, thanks to the connectivity offered by public transport, the value of this property has increased, in fact, in the last years and throughout the real estate crisis. Linked to this, or let's say one step further, looking at the regeneration impact of public transport. One example that dates back few years ago, showing that the opening of a new metro line in one of Lyon, so one of French city, Lyon area, increased very significantly the rate of regeneration in that part of the city. In fact, the proportion of buildings that were renovated or new in that area for business purposes was 4 times higher than in the average of the town, showing that the connectivity offered by public transport had an impact on the investment and reinvestment in the area. Turning to another element, but I think this is also something which is worth mentioning, is the link between connectivity and tourism and the economic impact of tourism. Here again, figures coming from North America shown that hotels in cities that are well connected where there is a good connection from the airport to the city center by rail, hotels have much better performance in those cities than in other cities where there are not such rail connections, fast connections between the airport and the city center. And we see here that they have analyzed the room rates and the revenue per room. That was more than 10% higher in those cities than in the average, or no, not the average, on cities not where there was not a rail connection from the airport to the city center. So the examples I've given so far focused on the role of public transport to support connectivity and the economic impact it has. I would like now to give a few more examples focusing really on the economic role of public transport, not necessarily linked to connectivity. The first element I would like to show, you see in this graph the correlation, the graph shows the correlation between the modal splits, and on the horizontal axis you have the proportion of trips made by public transport, walking, cycling, and the vertical axis shows you the cost of transport, the cost of mobility for the community as a percentage of the GDP. And what we see very clearly is that in cities where you have a higher share of public transport, the cost of transport for the community is divided by 2 compared to cities where there is almost no public transport. That means that citizens can spend their money on other things than fuel, and they can spend this money locally. So this is also a way to be able to support the local economic development. Something I would like to mention as well is about the job creation impact of public transport, but in the sector and in the supply chain, research has shown that per amount invested, investment in public transport infrastructure creates twice as many jobs as investing in other areas, such as investing in roads, for instance, for the same amount invested. This is because a number of factors. One of them is that public transport projects are usually less space consuming, and so less money is spent in land acquisition and can be spent on other elements. That public transport projects in cities are very complex projects that require a lot of different competencies and capabilities, and also links to the jobs in the supply chain, of course, for the building of vehicles, for instance. About the supply chain, I think it's also worth mentioning that the building of public transport vehicles, for instance, involves a very wide number of organizations. Each integrator, in fact, gets supplies for hundreds of companies from that have very different specialities, capabilities, and that provide jobs that link to very different and very varied skills. It goes from multinationals to small family companies, from IT to design to very different jobs. And this creates in the region a very strong network of employment linked to public transport, to the supply chain of public transport. So, getting to the conclusion of the presentation, I believe that strengthening the economic case for public transport, of course, helps to prioritize investment programs on public transport based on sound appraisal frameworks and sound appraisal principles, but also it helps to have a more solid business model for public transport. The economic argument is not only an argument for public authorities, it's also for the business communities. I have shown public transport has very significant benefits for the business communities. And so this is also something very important to have a more important involvement of businesses, of employers in the funding of public transport, either on a voluntary basis, like you have the case in Cologne, where a group of companies decided to fund themselves a new light rail line to serve their offices, or through funding mechanisms at the local level, such as employers' levy as we in France, or different versions of value capture finance. So I think it's making the economic case for public transport towards both the public authorities and the business community helps strengthening the business model of public transport. So I think probably repeating what Steve said before, we need to improve the economic appraisal practices for public transport to better make justice of the connectivity benefits. And as I said, we also need to better reflect those benefits in the very funding framework of public transport. So thank you very much for your attention.